Prime Minister Tony Abbott has moved to try to repair a quite extraordinary dip in relations with key neighbour Indonesia, but he has stopped short of apologising. Does he need to for the apparent indiscretions in Australian intelligence gathering in recent years? A student of Australia's relations with Indonesia, in fact one of the most respected in our country, is currently in Indonesia at a global anti-terror conference in Jakarta. Greg Fealy from the Australian National University joins us via Skype from Jakarta. Dr. Greg Fealy, thank you for taking time to speak to Breaking Politics today.
It's a pleasure, Tim.
First, give us a quick temperature and health check on Australia's relations with Jakarta. What sort of state are they in at the moment?
They're in a poor state, as bad a state as they've been in probably since the confrontation over East Timor back in 1999. The coverage in the Indonesian press this morning is very hostile towards Australia. President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, I think, feels under some pressure to take a very strong line. I think it's clear from his tweets that he is personally offended by the revelations that have come out from the Edward Snowden files. And this is going to take quite a bit of fixing by the Australians.
How unusual is it for any Indonesian president, but also SBY in particular, to hit Twitter and record his displeasure in this way?
I think it's almost unprecedented for him to include in a tweet a direct reference, critical reference to another head of state or to a Prime Minister in this case. And I think that's an indication of the depth of his irritation at what's happened. I think he probably feels as if the Australians have almost betrayed him, that he has done a great many things to help Australia in its bilateral relationship with Indonesia. He's done quite a few things that have caused him to cop a lot of flack domestically, and that when the news of these phone tapping activities come to light, well, it makes him look extremely bad, and it renews the criticism within the Indonesian political elite and within the media that Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono has been far too accommodatory towards Australia. So he feels, I think, very exposed by this.
So you believe this is a genuine feeling of annoyance and upset from the Indonesian president, as opposed to a sense that he needs to play that out politically to suit his Indonesian audience?
Oh, there's no doubt, I think, that he feels this very personally. He's a very private man. He reveals very little of himself in public. And what he does reveal, he wants to have it accompanied with the aura of high office. And I think the idea for him that private phone calls, and indeed phone calls from his wife, would be monitored by the Australians is something he would find very offensive. Of course, he would know, someone with his military background and his experience in government, he would know that this kind of thing takes place. But to be presented with very specific evidence of the exact nature of this eavesdropping, I think would be extremely irksome to him. And so I don't doubt that apart from the political considerations he has, this is also a very personal response, and I think that's what we saw in the tweets yesterday.
On the floor of Parliament, Prime Minister Abbott used very warm and quite generous terminology in talking about Indonesia and about SBY personally, but he pointedly stopped short, indeed almost ruled out any apology here, saying that Australia should not have to apologise. How important is an apology in the mix as far as Indonesia is concerned?
I think an apology would go some way towards diffusing this issue and speeding up the resumption of more normal relations, but it would take some swallowing of pride on Australia's behalf. And I think in one way Tony Abbott is quite correct. This is all governments attempt to do this kind of intelligence eavesdropping insofar as they're able to. But nonetheless, I think a gesture is needed towards the Indonesians, and without that gesture, it's likely that this problem is going to linger and that there could be some threat to a lot of cooperative arrangements between the two governments. I'd also say, Tim, that I think that Tony Abbott needs to craft his language a lot better towards the Indonesians. I think the very general statements he made yesterday clearly angered SBY because they made it appear as if Tony Abbott thought this was business as usual and not a particularly serious matter. I think it's also condescending for him to say that this kind of spying operation is in the interests of both countries. Indonesians will naturally say, well, it's up to them to decide what's in their interests. So even if Tony Abbott believes that, very genuinely, he shouldn't be saying this kind of thing. So I think he needs to get a lot more advice about how he would respond and what kind of things might appease the Indonesians to some extent.
So how might this affront play into cooperation on, say, the question of people smuggling or on counter-terrorism?
Things like counter-terrorism, defence ties, I'd be surprised if the Indonesians were going to jeopardise some of those cooperative arrangements. Boat people is a different matter because that's something driven almost entirely by the Australian side, and so that is one place where the Indonesians have a great deal of leverage. But they also need to be wary because this is an extraordinarily sensitive domestic political topic, and if there were a sudden influx of boats into Australian territory from Indonesia, well then there'd be a lot of pressure on Tony Abbott to do something about that, and that could see the relationship take an even worse turn than what we've had now. So I hope that the Indonesians are very measured in their response. I think they've made their point pretty clearly in the last day. And if they push this issue too far, they could be unleashing forces within Australia that are very difficult for the Abbott government to resist, at least in the short term.
The Abbott government can hardly be blamed for Edward Snowden's revelations, obviously, but how much of the problems in the relationship now can be sheeted home to some of the early jitters of the Abbott government in foreign relations, do you think?
I think that's true. This was not the Abbott government's fault that Snowden released these documents, and I think also this eavesdropping took place well before Tony Abbott became Prime Minister, but nonetheless he's going to have to try and explain this and deal with this. I think there's no doubt that goodwill towards Australia has been undermined for most of this year, particularly towards the Liberal Party, because predominantly because of the Liberal Party's rhetoric on the boat people issue. Some of the statements Tony Abbott made during the election campaign about paying bounties for people smugglers, buying boats, those kinds of things, went down very badly in Indonesia. There was a lot of adverse commentary. And when he was first became Prime Minister, he had reasonably successful trips to Indonesia, and I think many people, including myself, felt that he may have turned that around to some extent. But these recent allegations show that how thin the relationship had become, how little goodwill was in store, and it's made it very easy for the Indonesians to react so angrily as they have in the last few days.
Do you think that ultimately Australia will have to guarantee SBY that it will not ever again tap the phone of an Indonesian leader? Do you think they'll expect and ultimately get a guarantee like that?
They would certainly be hoping for a guarantee like that. The Australian intelligence community would probably be strongly urging the Prime Minister not to do that. But Barack Obama, to some extent, went down that path when he was trying to mollify the German Chancellor Merkel, when there were similar allegations against US tapping of her phone. And it should be something that Tony Abbott considers. There are a great many things that would be part of that equation if he was to do that. And it wouldn't be something that's done lightly, but that again would be something that would help the Indonesians to move quickly beyond this issue. Without those kind of gestures, I think this is going to continue to be a running problem in the bilateral relationship.
Labor MP Michael Danby suggested that one way through this might be to bring Indonesia at least a little further into the intelligence gathering tent, so to speak. Certainly not or couldn't on a full level with Australia's Five Eyes cooperation with major Western democracies. But would there be scope to give Indonesia a greater look into our intelligence sharing or not?
I think the scope is actually very limited. I know Bob Carr said a similar thing this morning, talked about a dramatic increase over time in our intelligence cooperation. I think there would be great reluctance on the Australian side to do that. Indonesia's intelligence community is not especially highly regarded, I think. On the Australian side, there would be concerns about the security of any information that was passed on. There's been a significant increase in intelligence exchanges since the Bali bombing in 2002, and so there's already quite a lot that's happening. But the sharing of raw intelligence data, the sharing of some of the more sensitive analysis, I think that would be the point at which the Australians would be very reluctant to go down that path, at least for the moment.
Finally, Dr. Greg Fealy, we can easily overestimate in Australia our importance in debates elsewhere in the world. How strongly is this story and sentiment about this issue running in Indonesia at the moment?
It's very strong indeed. There's a lot of senior political figures are coming out and making very emphatic statements about what Indonesia should do. One senior Islamic politician, for example, unfavourably compared Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono to President Suharto when President Suharto expelled a number of Soviet diplomats who were suspected of spying. There are a lot of people who are coming out and saying that the Indonesian president should be doing a lot more. I'm sure this is one of the things behind his tweets, but it just shows you how the mood has turned very quickly against Australia, and we're probably going to be the most unpopular country in Indonesia for some time as a result of this. Previously, it's been the last few years, it's been Malaysia that's had that uncoveted position, and Australia, I think, could very quickly be back to the kind of position it was in when we had all that tension about East Timor in the late 1990s.
Dr. Greg Fealy, thank you for speaking with Breaking Politics today.
It's a pleasure, Tim.